Imagine being pronounced dead, hanging on the gallows, and then, as doctors prepare your body for dissection, you open your eyes. This is not the plot of a horror film, but the true chilling story of Anne Green, a woman who, in 1650, had a brush with death and somehow emerged victorious. Prepare yourself for a journey through time to an age of darkness and superstition, where the line between life and death was as thin as a veil, and where a shocking event would rewrite the very rules of existence. In the heart of 17th century England, in the cold and severe Oxford of 1650, a story so incredible it defied all logic took shape, leaving an indelible mark on the collective memory. An event that not only shocked the era but still forces us to question the deepest mysteries of life and death. It is the story of a young woman, Anne Green, whose name echoes through the centuries not because of a heroic act, but because of a horrific and inexplicable miracle that transformed her end into a new beginning. In those days, life was a fragile breath, and death a constant and often brutal presence. Justice, moreover, was swift, ruthless, and rarely granted second chances. Anne Green, a young servant, found herself at the center of a scandal that was one of the most serious and condemnable crimes of its time: infanticide. The exact circumstances of her alleged crime are shrouded in the fog of time and the selective morality of the time, but the accusation was clear and the sentence equally merciless. In a world where pity was a luxury and guilt was assumed through public shame, Anne's fate was sealed. The sentence brooked no further discussion: capital punishment, a swift and brutal death sentence meant to serve as a warning to all. The day of execution arrived, a grey and windy day, as often happens in the darkest stories. The crowd gathered in large numbers around the Oxford gallows, their faces a mixture of macabre curiosity and awe. Anne was led to the gallows. She climbed the steps with an unsteady step, her heart pounding against her ribs, the frigid air burning her lungs. The execution wasn't as quick and clean as hoped. The executioner, perhaps inexperienced or perhaps overzealous, failed to break her neck on the first try. Anne struggled, agonizing for long, terrible minutes. The crowd watched in silence, holding their breath. Finally, her body, torn from life with unspeakable atrocity, stopped moving. Anne Green was, before everyone's eyes, dead. His body, now lifeless, yet was left hanging for the prescribed length of time, a reminder of the law and morality of the age. After what seemed like an eternity, it was removed and prepared for its final destination. But his ordeal was not yet over. In an era when science was beginning to lift the veil on many of the mysteries of the human body, it was common practice for the bodies of those condemned to death to be handed over to medical schools for anatomical dissection. Anne Green's body was then taken to Oxford University, destined to become an object of study for students and professors, a cold anatomical manual to reveal the secrets of death. Her corpse was carried into the cold, eerie space of the anatomy lab, a place where the silence was broken only by the rustling of equipment and the murmur of doctors busy preparing. Dim candlelight danced across the walls, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance with Anne's fate. There, on a stone table, Anne lay, a pale, inert shadow of the person she had once been. The signs of her terrible punishment were visible: her bruised neck, her drawn features, the rigidity of death already beginning to assert itself. The doctors, men of science, with their minds fixed on their task, prepared to reveal the secrets that his body, now extinct, would have to reveal. Among them were two eminent figures: William Petty, a brilliant anatomist and future founder of the Royal Society, and Thomas Willis, the physician who first described the Willis knot in the brain. They were there to conduct the dissection, to learn and to teach. They weren't expecting anything extraordinary, just another body to work on. The silence in the lab was almost tangible, broken only by the sound of sharp instruments being carefully arranged. The doctors bent over Anne's body, one of their hands already poised for the scalpel. But just as the blade was about to touch his skin, the unthinkable happened. A subtle, almost imperceptible contraction shook his seemingly lifeless body. It was a moment of hesitation for those present, a flutter of eyelashes in the vast panorama of silence. Then another spasm, more decisive this time. And then a muffled moan, a labored breath that tore through the heavy air of the laboratory. The doctors froze, their eyes widening in disbelief. The corpse was moving. What seemed like a post-mortem reflex quickly turned into something far more shocking. With horror and then with almost feverish exhilaration, they understood. Anne Green, the woman who had been declared dead, whose execution had been witnessed by hundreds of people, was still alive. It wasn't an illusion, it wasn't some macabre freak of nature. It was real. Her chest rose and fell, and her eyes, though still veiled, showed signs of life. One of the doctors approached her with a mixture of fear and amazement, and his trembling hand touched the woman's pulse. There was a faint pulse. Anne Green had returned. Panic quickly spread through the room. Students and assistants retreated, some in shock, others fearing divine or demonic intervention. But the doctors, overcoming their initial disbelief, reacted swiftly. What they had before them was not a corpse, but a patient in extreme shock. They immediately began resuscitation procedures. They rubbed her limbs, warmed her body, applied friction, and gave her strong liquors to stimulate circulation. News of what had happened spread like wildfire through the Oxford community. For many, it could only be a miracle, a sign of God's hand, a divine intervention that had brought Anne Green back from the brink. Anne's story became the focus of conversations, sermons, and gossip, fueling both fear and wonder. A woman who had been presumed dead, who had crossed the threshold of the afterlife, had returned among the living, becoming a symbol of the resilience of the human soul and the fragile, unpredictable nature of life itself. Not only did Anne Green survive, but her subsequent recovery, albeit slow and painful, further fueled the aura of mystery surrounding her. It took weeks for her to fully recover from the physical and psychological trauma she had suffered. Her voice gradually returned, her strength resurfaced, and with it, her story. The event of her resurrection radically changed her life. The law, faced with such an extraordinary case, found itself at a dead end. Was it possible to re execute someone who had already been executed and whom Providence had brought back to life? The answer was no. Anne Green was pardoned and released, her conviction overturned in the face of what was universally perceived as a higher intervention. She became a symbol of hope and survival, the woman who came back. She married, had children, and lived a relatively long and hopefully happy life. His story, a macabre ballet between death and rebirth, remains etched in the annals of history. It is a haunting and enduring reminder of the fragility of existence, the unexpected strength of life, and the mysteries that still elude our understanding. Anne Green's story reminds us that sometimes reality can far surpass our wildest fantasies.